The galaxy had learned to fear humanity's military. It had taken only a handful of brutal conflicts for the name of Earth's armed forces to be spoken in hushed, reverent tones. Their fleets burned across the void, their soldiers unmatched, in tenacity their strategies confounding even the most ancient warlords of the cosmos. And so, when the Zelthar Dominion set its gaze upon the agricultural colonies of Gideon 9, it did so with caution. Humanity's warriors were formidable, but warriors could be anticipated. Soldiers were trained within doctrines, bound by logistics, and conventional warfare. Farmers? The Dominion had no plans for them. It should have. Gideon 9 had once been a world of rolling fields and golden crops, its soil rich with nutrients carefully engineered over generations. It was not a fortress. It was not a strategic hub. It was food. It was sustenance for the growing web of human colonies stretching across the stars. The Zelthar, war-hardened conquerors that they were, saw only the opportunity to choke humanity's supply lines. They descended in force, confident that their biomech legions and pulse weaponry would turn the colony into another tally in their ledger of domination. Jack Dusty Callahan, a man who had spent his entire life with his hands in the dirt, watched the alien dropships descend from the sky, their black silhouettes blotting out the setting sun. He did not panic. He did not run. He only exhaled, a slow, measured breath, and pressed his palm into the rich soil beneath him. This land had been cultivated by sweat and blood, shaped by hands that had known both creation and hardship. It would not be surrendered easily at the heart of Gideon 9 among the fields of grain and towering hydroponic arrays. Elena Vasquez adjusted the scanner in her hands, its readout flickering with alerts as the invaders advanced. She was no soldier, but she understood ecosystems, understood balance and disruption. The Zelthar sought to strip this world of its life, but nature, when guided by human ingenuity, had ways of fighting back. Nearby, Theo Mendez, once a soldier, of Earth's feared military, now a farmer like the rest of them, loaded what few weapons they had onto an old utility vehicle. His gaze was steady, but there was fire beneath it. He had seen war. He had seen what happened to the defenseless when the strong decided they had no right to exist. There was an old saying among Earth soldiers: "No plan survives first. Contact." He wondered if the Zelthar had ever learned that lesson. The alien war machine began its march. Fields burned in controlled strikes, their perimeter tactics efficient, calculated. But the farmers of Gideon 9 had no intention of meeting them in open combat. They fought the way they had always lived, by working with the land, by bending nature to their will. Irrigation ditches became traps, their carefully engineered drainage systems redirecting entire rivers to flood enemy encampments. Chemical stockpiles meant to enrich soil were repurposed into weapons, explosive compounds derived from fertilizer sending shockwaves through enemy lines, crop dusters, repurposed in hours, swept across the skies, releasing clouds of fine, choking powders that corroded alien machinery, disrupted their sensitive respiratory systems. The Zelthar commanders, so accustomed to breaking the backs of lesser civilizations, did not understand what was happening. Their troops waded into fields expecting defenseless civilians, and found themselves ensnared in unseen quagmires of human ingenuity. The farmers knew this land in ways no invader ever could, and they turned that knowledge into a weapon sharper than any blade. As Dusty stood atop a grain silo, watching the first wave of alien forces stumble, their massive walkers sinking into unseen pits of loosened soil, he felt no satisfaction. Only certainty. This was not just a battle for land. This was a battle for survival, for the right to exist as free people under the stars. And if the Zelthar Dominion thought Earth's strength lay only in its soldiers, they were about to learn otherwise. They had prepared for humanity's armies, but they hadn't met its farmers. The Zelthar forces had come with the expectation of swift conquest, their biomechanical war engines, towering monstrosities of alien engineering, marched across the fields with heavy, methodical steps, their energy weapons primed to incinerate anything in their path. The skies above Gideon 9 darkened as their Dropships offloaded wave after wave of warriors clad in exoskeletal battle armor, their forms glistening like obsidian under the colony's twin suns. And yet they met no resistance. No soldiers lined up to challenge them. No desperate plea for surrender echoed through the colony's comm channels. The alien commanders hesitated, scanning the tranquil expanse of farmland, the neatly arranged irrigation channels, the silent grain fields swaying in the wind. Something was wrong. Jack Dusty Callahan watched them from the cover of an old harvester, his weathered face set in a grim expression. He had spent decades reading the land, learning its moods, anticipating its changes. And now, he read the enemy just as clearly. The Zelthar were waiting for an obvious response, for humanity's warriors to reveal themselves. But they weren't fighting soldiers. They were fighting survivors. Elena Vasquez crouched beside him, a portable scanner in hand, its display filled with scrolling data on the Zelthar physiology. She had seen reports of their kind before, cold, methodical killers, engineered for war. Their armor was designed to withstand plasma fire, their weapons calibrated for mass suppression. But they were not prepared for an enemy that understood the land better than they ever could. "They don't trust it," she murmured, nodding toward the advancing troops. "They don't trust stillness." Dusty smirked. "Good. That means we're winning." The first Zelthar squad stepped into the fields. The moment their heavy, segmented feet sank into the soft soil, the ground beneath them collapsed. Irrigation channels, dug deep and reinforced with retractable barriers, gave way in an instant. Water surged forward in engineered torrents, swallowing their formation in a flood of churning mud and debris. The biomechanical armor that protected them became an anchor, dragging them down as the current swept them away. Before their commanders could process the loss, the sky erupted in a shimmering mist. Crop dusters, modified overnight into makeshift chemical dispensers, swooped low over the battlefield, releasing a fine particulate cloud into the air. It was harmless to humans, but the Zelthar, whose bodies relied on a complex symbiosis of internal biosystems, reacted violently. Their breathing apparatuses clogged, their sensory input scrambled. Panic spread through their ranks as their towering walkers, now coated in the corrosive mist, began to seize, their joints locking up as the fine powder infiltrated their delicate biomechanical structures. From the shadows of the farmland, Theo Mendez watched the chaos unfold. His hands gripped the old rifle he had unearthed from storage, a relic of his military days. He didn't need to fire it. Not yet. The farmers of Gideon 9 had no intention of facing the Zelthar in direct combat. They would let the land fight, for them. A pulse of energy burst across the battlefield as the Zelthar command ships attempted to override the failing systems of their forces. Dusty, Elena, and Theo shared a look. The enemy was adapting, recalibrating. The first phase of their plan had worked, but it wouldn't be enough. The farmers had made their opening move. Now they had to make sure the Zelthar never got the chance to recover. The Zelthar commanders quickly realized that this was no conventional engagement. Their initial assault had been swallowed by the land itself, their elite warriors floundering in mud and blinded by airborne particulates. It was an insult to their military doctrine, an affront to their technological superiority, but they were nothing if not adaptable. From the command, ship hovering above Gideon 9's fields, Zelthar warlord Grixthol assessed the battle with a growing sense of frustration. He had expected resistance, yes, but not from common laborers. These were not soldiers. They were not trained in war, and yet they had turned the very earth against his forces. "Deploy purification drones," he ordered, his voice clicking, in his native tongue. "Burn the fields. Erase their weapons." A fleet of sleek insectoid drones descended from the skies, releasing a scorching wave of fire across the land below. The once vibrant crops ignited in a cascade of destruction, black smoke curling toward the heavens. The Zelthar advanced in formation, their steps now cautious but relentless, the soft soil beneath them firming as they adapted to the resistance. But the farmers had expected this. Jack Dusty Callahan crouched behind the remnants of an Old Silo watching the flames consume the golden fields. His heart clenched at the sight. Years of work, of labor reduced to ashes. But war required sacrifice, and this was one they had been willing to make. Phase 2, he muttered, his voice steady. Across the colony, hidden beneath the charred remnants of the fields, pre-rigged irrigation systems activated, releasing controlled bursts of highly volatile methane gas, an agricultural byproduct that had been accumulating for months. As the EZU flames met the concentrated pockets of gas, the land itself roared in defiance. Explosions rippled through the battlefield, sending Zelthar warriors and machinery hurtling through the air. Elena Vasquez watched the chaos unfold from the makeshift command center, a repurposed barn lined with holo displays and agricultural monitors. She tapped rapidly on her datapad, rerouting the colony's automated irrigation droids to assist in their counterattack. "We've cut their advancing forces by at least 30%, she reported. But they're stabilizing. Their command structure is too strong." Theo Mendez, standing beside her, checked the charge on his rifle. "Then we take the fight to their leaders." A new plan was forming, one far riskier than anything they had attempted before. The Zelthar were struggling against the environment, but they wouldn't falter forever. Their forces were designed to wage planetary conquests, their adaptability unrivaled. If the farmers didn't strike a decisive blow soon, the aliens would regroup, overwhelm them, and Gideon 9 would be lost. Dusty didn't hesitate. "We go underground." Deep beneath the colony, an extensive network of tunnels ran, like veins through the land, ancient irrigation pathways and storage chambers, once meant to sustain generations of farmers. Now they would serve a different purpose. Under the cover of darkness, the resistance moved through the tunnels, navigating their way toward the Zelthar's forward command post. Above, the invaders pushed forward, their biomech walkers pressing through the smoldering ruins of the fields. They believed the battle was shifting in their favor. They were wrong. As the first wave of farmers emerged from the tunnels, they struck with precision. Remote-activated harvesters, their massive blades repurposed into mechanical guillotines, tore through the enemy lines. Repurposed livestock drones, fitted with crude but effective explosives, charged into the heart of the Zelthar encampments. The aliens had come expecting to conquer warriors. Instead, they had met engineers, survivalists, people who had built civilizations from barren soil, and they were losing. Yet even as victory seemed within reach, the Zelthar command ship began to descend, its massive form blotting out the sky. From its underbelly, a new threat emerged. Elite warforms, towering creatures bred for destruction, their armor impervious to the crude weapons of farmers. Dusty gritted his teeth. The war wasn't over yet. The ground trembled beneath the weight of the Zelthar warforms as they descended onto Gideon 9. These were not mere soldiers. They were living weapons, towering creatures with armored hides that rippled with unnatural sinew, their every movement precise, methodical, and devastating. Where standard Zelthar infantry had faltered against the ingenuity of the farmers, these creatures would not. They had been designed to win wars, to crush civilizations, to enforce the absolute will of the Dominion. From his vantage point near the ruined silos, Jack Dusty Callahan took a slow breath. The battlefield had become a scorched wasteland, the once golden fields now reduced to embers and shattered terrain. But the fight was far from over. Elena Vasquez, crouched beside him, scanned the war forms with her portable sensor array. Their armor is organic, reinforced with some kind of regenerative plating. Standard weapons won't even scratch them. Theo Mendez spat into the dirt. Good thing we don't use standard weapons. The farmers of Gideon 9 had no tanks, no warships, no orbital support. But they had the land, and they had their wits. And so they adapted, as they always had. Dusty grabbed his comm. All units initiate iron route. Across the battlefield, buried deep beneath the soil, lay their final contingency plan, a network of reinforced steel harrows, old farming equipment repurposed into subterranean spears. With a single command they activated, shooting upward like the talons of the very earth itself. The first war form, A monstrous behemoth standing nearly 3 stories tall took a step forward and was impaled in an instant. The ground beneath it split open, and jagged spikes of reinforced plasteel tore through its legs, sending it crashing to the ground. Its agonized roar echoed across the plains as its regenerative plating failed against the sheer force of impact. But there were still more. The second warform adapted, leaping into the air with impossible speed. It landed amid a cluster of resistance fighters, its massive claws carving through the earth. Dusty barely managed to shove Elena out of the way before the ground split apart under the force of its attack. Theo raised his rifle, aiming directly for the creature's sensory nodes. "Come on, you ugly bastard." He fired once, twice, before the warform swatted him aside like an insect. The farmers weren't winning anymore. They were barely holding on. And then something changed. A deep rumbling shook the battlefield, but this time it wasn't from the Zelthar. It was from the Uroxi. The enslaved alien species, long kept under Dominion rule, had watched the battle unfold. They had seen the farmers fight, seen them resist not with overwhelming power but with sheer resilience, and something in them stirred, an instinct buried under centuries of oppression. One by one, the Uroxi rose. At first, the Zelthar commanders paid them no mind. They were livestock, broken creatures meant only for servitude. But then the first Uroxi rammed into a warform, its massive horns shattering its exoskeletal armor. The second followed, then the third, and suddenly the battlefield erupted with rebellion. Dusty watched in awe as the Uroxi, creatures who had known only chains, turned their fury on their oppressors. Their raw strength, combined with the farmers' sabotage and guerrilla tactics, turned the tide. The Zelthar command ship, sensing the shift, attempted to retreat. Elena saw it first. "They're trying to cut their losses." Theo wiped blood from his face, grinning despite the pain. "Not today, they're not." With a final, desperate gambit, the farmers triggered their last line of defense, an old atmospheric harvester, overloaded to its maximum capacity. It wasn't a weapon, but when repurposed, it became something far worse. The device activated, sending a shockwave of charged ionized gas into the sky, disrupting every electromagnetic system within range, including the Zelthar ship's propulsion systems. For the first time in Dominion history, a Zelthar warship fell from the sky. The impact rocked Gideon 9 to its core, sending a fiery explosion into the heavens. Silence followed. Then, the cheers of a people who had won their world back. Smoke still clung to the air, mingling with the rich scent of scorched earth. The land bore scars from the battle, deep craters where explosions had torn through the fields, skeletal remains of alien warforms sprawled across the plains, the shattered husk of the Zelthar command ship smoldering in the distance. Yet, amidst the destruction, there was victory. Gideon 9 still stood. Jack Dusty Callahan ran a hand through the blackened soil, feeling the warmth radiating from beneath the surface. It would take years to restore what had been lost, but the Eoiner land was resilient. It could heal. So could its people. Elena Vasquez limped over, her datapad flickering as she assessed the damage. "The fields are wrecked," she admitted, pushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "We'll need to start new seed rotations, rebuild irrigation lines, maybe even terraform some sections." Dusty exhaled. "Then we better get to work." Across the colony, survivors moved with purpose. The farmers, exhausted but undefeated, began picking up the pieces, salvaging equipment, tending to the wounded, and clearing debris. Their victory had come at a cost, but they had earned it, every single inch of it. Theo Mendez stood atop a battered storage crate, overlooking the captured Zelthar prisoners. Not many had survived. Those that had were corralled together, stripped of their weapons, their biomechanical armor disabled. They no longer looked like conquerors. They looked lost. "What do we do with them?" one of the younger farmers asked, gripping a rusted rifle. There was anger in his voice, the kind of anger that called for retribution. Theo studied the aliens, then glanced toward the Uroxi, the once enslaved race who had turned against their overlords. They stood tall now, unshackled, their eyes filled with something unfamiliar. Hope. Dusty approached, dusting off his worn gloves. "Send them off-world," he said. "Let the galaxy see what happens to those who try to break us." There was silence at first, then nods of agreement. Humanity wasn't like the Zelthar. They didn't conquer. They endured. Elena turned her gaze to the horizon. "This isn't over," she said. "The Dominion will come back. They always do." Theo smirked, rolling his sore shoulders. Dusty chuckled, standing tall as he surveyed his ruined but still living home. The Zelthar had feared Earth's military. They had been right to. But they had never feared its farmers. That mistake had cost them dearly. The fields of Gideon 9 would grow again. The scars of battle ran deep, but the farmers were already at work, their hands in the soil, planting the next harvest. Smoke still rose from the ruins of the Zelthar warship, its shattered remains serving as a monument to the day when common laborers had stood against one of the most feared empires in the galaxy. And won. Jack Dusty Callahan watched the sun rise over the ravaged land, his fingers trailing through the dirt. The ground was still rich, still alive. It would take time, but it would recover, just like they had. Elena Vasquez knelt beside him, running a soil scanner over the ground. "Nutrient levels are low," she murmured, adjusting the device. "But give it a few seasons. It'll be fertile again." Dusty smirked. Never doubted it. The Uroxy, now freed from their servitude, had begun to settle among the colony, helping to rebuild. They worked beside the humans, their powerful forms carrying heavy debris, their deep voices filling the air with a strange but harmonious rhythm. They had found a new home here, a place where they were not slaves but equals. In the distance, Theo Mendez stood near the communication array, his arms crossed as he listened to the latest transmissions from off-world. He turned toward Dusty and Elena, his expression thoughtful. "They know," he said simply. Dusty raised an eyebrow. "The Dominion," Theo clarified. "Their fleets are repositioning. They haven't launched another attack yet, but—" He trailed off, letting the unspoken warning hang in the air. Elena sighed, standing. "They won't forget this, neither will the rest of the galaxy." Dusty exhaled, standing alongside her. Humanity had proven something today. They weren't just soldiers, conquerors, or diplomats. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors. Theo tapped the side of his rifle. "Word is spreading. Other colonies, even non-human ones, are hearing about Gideon 9. Some of them want to fight. Others want to trade." He smirked. "And some? They just want to learn how we did it." Dusty looked at the horizon, where the first hints of green were already returning to the blackened soil. The Zelthar had thought they could take this world. They had thought a handful of farmers wouldn't stand in their way. They wouldn't make that mistake again. As the sun climbed higher, a distant streak of light flashed across the sky, a ship approaching from the void. It wasn't Zelthar. It was someone else. Dusty tilted his hat back and grinned. "Looks like we've got company." Gideon 9 wasn't just a colony anymore. It was a symbol,